What's up, guys? Welcome back to the CoachALFutrell YouTube page. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you guys are aware of every time I drop a video over on this page. Now, today we're just going to be firing from the hip. I'm going to be talking about various things within the health and fitness space. So let's jump right into it. First things first, I'm always getting questions. What's the best exercise to do? What's the best supplement to take? What's the best form of cardio to do? Should I train fasted? Should I avoid carbs? Should I avoid fats? How much protein should I have? Blah, blah, blah. All these different things. And not that those things don't have their own significance or value, but I always try to get people to understand this. You need to lock down and hone in on the basics before anything else, before you start worrying about the different supplements to take. Even right now with this whole peptide craze, right? The way it's being talked about, the availability to the public, all of that is new. But as far as the compounds themselves that are made up of several amino acids, these things are not new. Again, just the marketing is new. The way it's being pitched to the people is new. So that's that. But let's get back on track here. Like I said, I always try to get people to understand what you need to do is you need to focus on the basics. So number one, let's just start with some form of training in addition with physical activity. So sometimes people think training itself is going to be enough and that they're just going to train their way to better health. Training is just one aspect that you should be doing with some degree of difficulty. So if you're going into training and you're always just going through the motions, kind of moseying through the session, you're never really challenging yourself. Everything feels easy. You're doing the same weights over and over and over for the same amount of reps, and you're never actually pushing yourself, not to the point where you're not going to recover from it or you're making things too damn hard. Let's just leave it at that. But the training itself needs to be challenging. You need to be creating the stimulus and the signal for your body to actually change. And a lot of people, they miss that aspect. They go to the gym a lot, but that's what they do. They're actually just in the gym. They're not actually training with a purpose. They don't actually have a good intensity behind what they're doing. On top of the training, we also have to factor in the additional physical activity. So the training is one thing. Then we have our forms of cardiovascular work. So that could be low intensity, steady state. That could be medium intensity work like a jog. That could be high intensity interval training. So sprint intervals, assault bike intervals, get the heart rate skyrocketing up. And then we allow for it to come down before we go into that next bout of high intensity exercise. That's just one variation or one form of additional physical activity away from the traditional strength training, resistance training, weightlifting, however you want to break it down with the terms. But you also have to think about what are you doing outside of the gym? How often are you walking? Now, just for example, I usually tell my clients, hey, you know what you should do? If you're going to eat 3 times a day, I try to tell them after each meal, try to get in a 15 to 20-minute walk after each meal. This is going to aid with digestion. This is also going to help with the insulin sensitivity and just overall helping you get more steps throughout the day and getting more overall movement. Other things people don't take into account or pay attention to outside of training, their cardio, and getting the walks in after they're eating is try not to be lazy. And I know that this can be hard for people, especially if you work a traditional 9 to 5 type of job where you're sitting all day, you're very sedentary. So you're already promoting this sluggish behavior. Then you get home, you're not cleaning, so you're not and hopefully you are, because no one wants a dirty house, but you're not cleaning as much. So you're not even getting that movement around the house. You're not doing yard work, all these different things. So we have to take into account the additional physical activity outside of the training and outside of the traditional cardio. We have to factor that in as well when we're talking about additional movement. Now, moving to the nutrition side of things. Right now, in my opinion, there's just too many distractions. There's too many buzzwords. Everywhere you look, you see a label of a food and it's going to tell you it's low carb, it's high protein, it's low fat, it's sugar free, it's this, that, and the third. A lot of this is just the design of great marketing. Something could have a lot of protein. Let's take like a protein cookie, a protein muffin, something along those lines. Now, the trick is they're telling you, hey, this muffin has 20, 25 grams of protein in it. And you're someone who's looking at it like, hey, I need to get my protein up. So let me go ahead and opt for this protein cookie or this protein muffin to help me get to my protein number that I'm aiming for the day, or just for more protein in general if you're someone who's not tracking. Now, the downfall of that is, yeah, you ate this muffin. Yeah, it had 20 grams of protein because that's how it was marketed, but you weren't paying attention to the amount of carbohydrates that it had. You weren't paying attention to the amount of fats that it had. So now you ate this protein muffin to get the 20 grams of protein, but you also took on a abundance of calories because the carbs and the fats were higher. Now we flip it and then we go into like a low carb food. So people think, oh, this food is saying that it's low carb. It's great. Well, it just might be higher in fat. And fat is the most dense macronutrient because it carries 9 calories per gram. So just because it's low carb doesn't mean that it's not loaded up with fat. Just because something is low fat, it doesn't mean that it is not loaded up with carbs. Just because something is high protein, it doesn't mean that it's favorable for the carbs and or the fats. So you guys have to do your due diligence when you're looking at the foods that you're eating. Now, what I recommend for most people is try to, for the most part, let's just use a nice round number, 80% of the time. 80% of the time, opt for some sort of lean protein source and then pair that with a complex carbohydrate. So maybe a sweet potato, some whole grains, something along those lines. Not that you can't eat simple carbs or simple sugars, you can as well, but lean protein, complex carbohydrate, and then just make sure you're getting in your fruits and vegetables on top of that. And for the most part, from a nutrient standpoint, you are going to get an abundance of the things that matter without feeling like you have to go and opt for protein muffins, low carb this, low fat that. It's just all a big distraction. So that's number one with the nutrition as a whole. There's a lot of distractions, there's a lot of buzzwords, and people are being misled when it comes to the foods that they're choosing because they're basing how they're going about their nutrition on what they're seeing on these labels. And in their mind, it sounds good when you hear low carb, low fat, high protein, but that's just a marketing tactic and it's not telling you the whole story of that food. Another thing with nutrition, and this is something that people have said for years, and it's just not true. They think eating fat makes you fat, right? So I hear people say, oh, I need to avoid this food because it has fat in it. Okay. Well, eggs, they have fat in them. They're a great source for many nutrients, including healthy fats. They'll give you a little bit of protein. It's not protein abundant like egg whites are, but the fat that's found in the yolk of the egg, it's really not detrimental to your health unless you are someone who's allergic to eggs, or maybe you just don't like eggs, or maybe you're consuming so many eggs that it's driving your overall calorie total up. Or extra virgin olive oil, it's a great fat source, but it's easy to overdo it and get too many calories coming from it because, again, fat is the most dense macronutrient that there is out of the big three when we compare it to carbs, which have 4 calories per gram, and when we compare it to protein, which also has 4 calories per gram. So it's not that eating fat source foods makes you fat. What tends to happen is a lot of fat source foods, since fat is the most dense macronutrient, they're generally higher in calories relative to the volume of food that they give you, right? So you take like a little handful of almonds, handful of cashews, couple tablespoons of peanut butter, a couple tablespoons of olive oil, 3 eggs. And once you look at this from the, bigger picture, you'll see you're not really getting a lot of food per se, but you are getting a lot of calories. So it's not necessarily that eating fat is making you fat. If you feel this way, you're probably opting for foods that are typically higher in fat, but you're also not watching the portion or the quantities of which you eat those foods and the frequencies of which you eat those foods, and it's just driving your calories up on average over time. And once you consume too many calories compared to the amount that you burn, we all know that that is a calorie surplus. And on average, over time, you are going to gain weight. Another thing people love to say is, well, I'm eating healthy, so everything should be fine. Well, just because the food is healthy, that does not mean that it's calorie friendly. And that kind of piggybacks on the other two things that I talked about. The misrepresentation of how food is being marketed, and then also understanding that it's not one particular macronutrient that is making things tough for you. So again, healthy fats, olive oil, eggs, avocado, fatty fish that are rich in omega 3s. These are good foods, meaning that they're healthy. But if you eat too much of them and by default get too many calories, it has nothing to do with the quality of the food. It has everything to do with how many calories you're getting from that food, despite the food being quality in itself, or of it being a quality representation of food as a whole. Same thing can go for your fruits and your vegetables and your lean meats. Now, it's going to be hard for you to get a ton of calories from certain fruits and vegetables. For example, broccoli. You're going to have to eat a shit ton of broccoli in order for you to get a large, vast amount of calories coming from that broccoli. But in turn, if you're eating something like a lot of bananas, what's going to happen is it's not going to take too many bananas before your calories start going up, despite these foods being healthy. So this is something people have a hard time distinguishing between, is eating healthy automatically means that the food is low calorie, and that's just not the case. So that's another thing that people need to pay attention to. Yes, we do want to opt for quality foods, but just because it is a quality, healthy food, that doesn't mean that the calories are favorable for what it is that you're trying to do. Now, if you're not trying to lose body fat, you are purposely trying to get bigger and you need to be in somewhat of a surplus, that's your business. And then again, yes, you could just opt for more healthy food and then by default get more calories and keep it inside of the healthy food realm. You don't need to go off and, start binging on junk in order to get your calories up. And then while we're talking about junk, everybody's definition of junk is going to be different. Some people's definition or bucket of junk, they may look at junk food as things like burgers, fries, pizza, candy, cakes, cookies, ice cream, everything and whatever they feel is the bucket of junk food. Now, it's not that those foods can't be eaten. And this is another thing I try to get people to understand. Now, if someone just doesn't like those foods and then they want to avoid them in their quest to lose weight or in their quest to lose body fat and they want to completely avoid them, sure, you can do it. But if you are someone who likes to have foods like that here and there, meaning you have them at a lower frequency. You don't have them on a regular basis. And then as you're having those foods, you make sure that you're not prioritizing them over the nutrient rich, healthy foods. And then it can work out for you. That's if you can handle that. Some people, again, they need to just go ahead and cut it out completely, and that's fine, but you don't want to set your nutrition habits up and build them around things that are unsustainable. So again, if you like a food and you know that you're going to opt to have that food on somewhat of a regular basis, my suggestion is still go ahead and have that food, but make sure you're paying attention to how frequently you're having it, and also what is the quantity and the portion size of said food that you're having. So if you like pizza, you might not need to totally ditch pizza. But if you're someone when you eat pizza, you always eat 6, 7, or 8 slices, maybe it's time to start opting for 1 or maybe 2 slices when you have the pizza. That way you can build your diet around the healthier foods, your lean meats, your fruits and your vegetables. So you're making sure that you're getting your protein and fiber-rich foods and complex carbs before you're worrying about eating the pizza, before you're worrying about having the donuts, the candies, the cakes, the ice cream, the burgers, the fries, all the different sauces. Put those things on the back end. Stop trying to make that the foundation of the diet, and then you're trying to fill in healthy foods on the back end. That's a bad way to go about it. That's not a way that I tell my clients they should go about it. Again, I have people who can just very sharply cut things off and they can manage it, and it is very sustainable for them. I have other people who they know, hey, I like this food. And again, I just tell them, like, well, let's make this sustainable. You don't need to cut it out completely, but we need to cut down the frequency and we need to cut down the portion size, aka the quantity that you're having of said food. So another thing, since we're just going off and we're firing off the hip here when we're talking about health and fitness, let's just talk about stress. So everyone is going to be carrying some form of stress for the most part. And some people's stress is more prevalent than others. But this is something that you have to try to manage to the best of your ability. And there are some things when you don't take care of them, they indirectly can raise your stress, right? So if you're not someone who's prioritizing getting enough sleep, you're not prioritizing getting movement, you're not prioritizing training, you're not doing some structured cardio here and there, you're not eating well, when you're putting all those things on the back burner, you can just self-induce stress from that, right? So if you're sleep deprived, you're going to feel sluggish, you're going to feel lethargic, and then the stress can be a byproduct of that. If you're someone who is not training, you're not eating well, you're not taking care of yourself, next thing you know, you're looking in the mirror, you're comparing yourself to others, you're grabbing on the love handles, you're looking at the belly, your self-confidence is going down. These are all ways to have self-inflicted stress that could be managed. You're not going to totally get rid of stress, but there are things that you can do to mitigate the stress. And that's what people really need to focus on. It's not about having no stress. It's about lowering the stress and managing the stress as best as we can so it doesn't become a hindrance and interrupt what it is that we're trying to accomplish from a health and fitness standpoint. So on top of those type of stressors, you also have life stress, right? The stress of your relationships with your friends, your family, your significant other, your coworkers, things of that nature. Those, again, are things that you need to learn how to manage because you may not be able to completely avoid those things. So the stress is always going to be there. So if we're doing a quick recap already, we talked about stress, we talked about nutrition, we talked about training. We talked about additional movement outside of the training. We talked about the buzzword marketing. Next, let's jump into what I like to call like the 5%ers or the supplement game, right? So people love to come to me and say, should I be taking this supplement? How much of this supplement should I be taking? Again, if you don't have a good foundation with these other things, then taking the supplement is not going to do what you expect it to do. So, like some supplements, I'll just say like they're a waste of time. Like people love trying to go and take a fat burner and say, yeah, I'm on this fat burner and this is going to help me drop the body fat. Well, if your nutrition is not on point, if you're not training and training with a good intensity, if you're not getting adequate amount of sleep, if you're not managing your stress, if you're not doing those things at a good to great to excellent level, the fat burner isn't going to do anything because the fat burner can't replace the work that you need from those things. And I'm using the fat burner as one example. Things like creatine, things like peptides, multivitamins, fish oils, all these things, they can be good in the right foundation, in the right program. So it doesn't mean that they're useless like the fat burner is. I'll go ahead and say, like, I'm a big believer, a firm believer that you can get great benefits from creatine depending on what peptide you're taking and what you're trying to use it for. Peptides can be good in the right environment if you have these other things set up and they're spot on or you're doing them at a great level. Whey protein can be good if you're someone who struggles to get protein in from the diet. It can be a good way to augment your protein intake to make sure that you're hitting your total daily protein number that you're shooting for on a daily basis. And a pre-workout, most pre-workouts are going to be filled with ergogenic age, things that are going to help you perform better in the gym. Those are probably like the main four, and I'm not saying that I use those. Those are the ones that I feel like have more validity to them than a lot of the other things that you see on the market. But again, it all comes down to, do you have the right foundation in order for those things to make the difference that they could make? If you don't have the foundation set up, you're going to add these things in and then you're not going to see much change. Even if we wanted to throw in anabolic steroids in there, sure. Can you build muscle with anabolic steroids without truly resistance training? Sure, that's what the studies say, but best believe the people who are actually training along with the anabolic steroids versus the people who are just going to take steroids and sit on the couch, the results are going to be much different for both parties. Like that we can agree on. So despite what these studies say, because people love telling me that, oh, you can just take steroids and do nothing and get the body of your dreams. Just because you put on a little bit of muscle doesn't mean you have the body of your dreams. The body of your dreams can be bigger than just the vain look, right? How does your body feel? How are your organs working? Are things operating at an optimal level? You could take anabolics and fuck yourself up, to be frank. Or you could take anabolics, you can be tied in with a doctor or someone who really knows what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. You guys are getting blood tests done every 90 to 120 days and things are being monitored properly. Those people are going to see better results than the people who are just pinning out of the blue and just doing it just because they saw somebody else do it. And while we're talking about this, another problem in the industry, I would say, is the young people who are too quick to jump on anabolic steroids. Your endocrine system is not even done developing yet. And they're also trying to hop on peptides super early. So here's the deal. Think of your body like a tree, okay? So we got the seed in the ground, and then the tree is starting to grow. Let your tree mature to the furthest extent that it can before you think about introducing anabolics or peptides. I'm just going to be frank. And that's for the young viewers. Reason being, you don't even know what your body was capable of naturally because you chose to start pinning and doing gear at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. Then you ran a cycle. You're not doing the cycle the right way. You're taking too much of one thing, not taking enough of the antis that are going to help mitigate the risk that comes along with taking the anabolics or the peptides. And you're just setting yourself up for maybe a shorter life, right? So think about if you really want to see 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, and so on, possibly, you need to be thinking about that. And I don't think young people think about that enough. And they're doing things for the here and the now. And often they're doing things to try to please someone else who doesn't really care about if you're going to see 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100, possibly further than that. When you're thinking about peptides, when you're thinking about introducing anabolics, you got to think past the now. How big can your arms get now? That all sounds fun until you have a health problem later on that, quite frankly, you may not be able to fix. And now you're cutting off days of your lifespan in order to fill some void that you have right now. This void, you're actually doing it for someone else. You're doing it to impress the internet. You're doing this for a sport. Maybe you're into bodybuilding. Like, think about bodybuilding from a percentage standpoint. Do you know how many bodybuilding shows there are every weekend across the entire world? Do you know how many people win shows and never go pro? Do you know how many people win shows and go to nationals and never place well enough at nationals to become pro? Do you know how many people who go to nationals, place well enough, they become pro, and then they never do anything in the pros? Do you know how many people are in the pros and they're damn good pros, but they're never going to be the elite pro? So you got to think about that small percentage of great pros and what the sport is and what it has to offer you. And if that is actually worth you shaving days off your life, if that's actually worth you being healthier down the line, when you're 70 plus years old, and hopefully you make it there. So again, that was for the youngster who's watching. You have to take these things into consideration. There's more life after how big can I make my arms. There's more life after how wide can I make my back. There's more life after how big can I make my quads. There's more life after winning a bodybuilding show and getting a $2 trophy. There's more life than, hey, going to nationals and I'm trying to turn pro. There's more life after you turn pro. Because again, if you just, look around, and I know a lot of high level people who are competing at the regional level. They're the top people at nationals. They're the top people, and they've made it to the pros and they're trying to inch their way up. Trust me, it is a lot harder than you think. And the exception is exactly that. It's the exception. There's a very small percentage of people who are going to become a well-renowned, well-known bodybuilder where that is enabling them to feed themselves, feed their family, keep the lights on, pay the gas bill, the electricity bill, pay their mortgage, all the things that you may not be thinking about at this young age that you're probably going to have to deal with later in life. Bodybuilding may not actually support that. And so, again, just take that into consideration. Think about that. And like I said, we're having this conversation and I'm just kind of firing from the hip. and just talking about many different things within the health and fitness space that I feel a lot of people ask me about. And maybe I'll do another video like this and we can get into more, but this one, it's running long, but I guess I can jump into another one, and that would be fat burning. So this is another like buzzword that you hear. So I need people to understand this. And I've said this a million times. Fat burning and losing body fat, they are two different things. One is describing what energy source your body is tapping into to use for fuel. The other is telling you that you are losing body fat. You can be a good, efficient fat burner and still be setting yourself up to gain weight and gain body fat. So when people talk about working out in these fat burning zones, they're really just speaking to their body utilizing the stored fat for energy. Again, that does not mean that you are automatically losing body fat. Here's how this works. I want you to think about somebody who's the sprinter. In the time that they're sprinting, and they're sprinting at this very high speed, and they are not getting in a large amount of oxygen on a regular basis, their body is going to tend to lean towards using carbohydrates as the fuel source to facilitate for that activity. When someone's walking at a lower pace, at a lower intensity, and they are getting in a vast amount of oxygen, their body is typically tapping into the fat stores to facilitate the energy for that particular exercise. Now, that's just one way or one comparison to look at. We could also look at something like someone who is strength training and doing multiple straight sets of an exercise versus someone who is just jogging on a treadmill for an hour, right? The weightlifting intensity, if it's great, they're using one fuel source versus the person who's running for 60 minutes straight, they're using another fuel source. So again, we're talking about fuel sources being used. We're not actually talking about if the body fat is being reduced on the body. In order for the body fat to be reduced, we know this time and time again, study after study. It's pretty self-evident along with the actual information that we have from the literature. You need to be in a caloric deficit over a period of time on average in order for you to lose the body fat. Truly, this isn't about being in a fat burning zone. If your diet is not compliant with being in a calorie deficit, then the fat is not going to come off. Same thing goes for the weight. A lot of people, again, they think, well, I'm just going to eat this certain food, blase. If you're not in the calorie deficit over time, on average, you're not going to lose the weight. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. This is one of my longer videos, just doing a ton of talking here about a lot of different things within the health and fitness space. Again, I'll do another follow-up video another time where I'm just kind of firing from the hip. But you guys don't forget to, again, like, comment, subscribe to the page, turn on your notification bell so you guys are aware every time that I drop a video. Don't forget to ask me some questions in the comments. I'll get back to you. You guys can also follow me on all my other platforms. You guys can join my Skool community, which is a community of people that I facilitate information to on a regular basis. And you guys are probably going to find answers to a lot of things that you have questions about just by joining the Skool. The Skool platform, it is free. You guys can visit my website for several of my other services at physicalprogression.com, online training, in-person training, small group training, nutrition coaching. I hope you guys got value out of this video, and I hope this resonated with some people and, gave them something to think about so they can get on track with their health and fitness and, stop running around in circles and majoring in the minors, which is just short for you're putting too much thought into the minor things that aren't going to make a big difference. Major in the majors. So again, majoring in the majors. Get your training right, get your training intensity right, add in your cardio, know what form of cardio you're doing, why you're doing it, get your additional movement outside of the training and the cardio, get your nutrition right, make sure we're primarily eating lean protein sources, fruits, vegetables, complex carbohydrates. Again, the majority of the time. Doesn't mean you can't have some fun foods here and there. Just try to make sure that you're not building your entire diet off of the fun foods and then trying to fill in the essential foods that are going to be better for you from a nutrient profile standpoint. Make sure you're getting those first and then getting the fun foods after that. Make sure you're managing the stress as best as you can. Make sure you're not dabbling into too many supplements and thinking it's going to work magic for you or that it's going to be some cure for something that the basics will help you get over, right? Focus on the basics first. And after you get the basics down and you've been nailing those for a long time and you feel confident and sure that you're doing those to the best of your abilities, then start worrying about the little minor things. All right. All right, guys. So I'm out again. Drop the like, subscribe to the channel, comment, turn on the notification bell. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.